Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Well, howdy, folks, and welcome to Literary AF Podcast. My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And we're here to talk about books.
Books.
And reading them. Well, we did 5 weeks on Twilight, the greatest love story our generation has ever known.
We did too, wow. 5 whole weeks.
And so now we decided to take a little break from the Paranormal Romance before we hit you with more Paranormal Romance next week. We're going to talk about a book called Death Comes to Pemberly by P.D. James.
Yes, I think. Pretty sure it's P.D. James.
Yeah. We are not going to Google it quickly right now. It is definitely P.D. James. We knew it off the top of our head. We are actually geniuses when it comes to books and remembering things.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was P.D. James. Look at that. We are good.
We're good. We got it.
So this is an unofficial sequel to Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
It is,
which there are many.
There are many.
Many.
But this one kind of, it's a little different because like the author is like a renowned mystery writer, I guess.
Yeah, she is.
And so it's kind of like, oh, this is like a renowned author at like the top of her career writing a Pride and Prejudice sequel thing. So it's not viewed with the same like fan fiction-y type lens that a lot of the other ones are viewed with.
All of like Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth are married and very fanfic-esque.
Yeah, so
yeah.
This one has a little bit more, I guess, credibility.
They also made this one into a TV series, BBC miniseries, I think.
Did you watch it?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I forgot.
So Danny actually owns the book, but I am the one who read the book.
Yes. I've been too busy with Twilight, so I didn't get around to reading this one too.
Yeah, and this book took me a surprisingly long time to work my way through. It's not that long. I mean, it's 400 pages, but they're not like dense pages. Like they're
right.
The writing is pretty, like, it's a decent size, and
yeah.
It's like, yeah. But it took me a very long time to read, and I'm going to get into that when we talk about it.
Okay.
So we'll just start with a quick plot summary.
Yep.
Should we do a quick refresher of Pride and Prejudice? Okay, 30 seconds, Pride and Prejudice refresher. Go.
Elizabeth Bennet is unmarried, and her sister is super pretty, and she meets Mr. Bingley, and then Mr. Bingley's best friend is Mr. Darcy, but Mr. Darcy's a bit of a prick, but Mr. Darcy's also in love with Elizabeth, and they have a whole lot of back and forth, and then Elizabeth realizes that Mr. Darcy's not actually a huge prick, he's actually kind of nice, and Mr. Darcy realizes that he can live with Elizabeth's awful family, and then they get married. The end.
True. One important character that is very important in the other book, though, that Danny missed, minus points for her.
You gave me 30 seconds.
Is Wickham, which was Darcy's adopted brother when they were younger.
Yep. Who married one of Elizabeth's sisters, Lydia.
And but he was like a dastardly scoundrel.
Yes.
And he tried to abscond with Darcy's younger sister.
That's true. Georgiana.
And Georgiana and Wickham both play major roles in this one.
Okay.
So, Death Comes to Pemberley. It's set, I believe, 6 years after Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
First of all, the book starts with I thought it was relatively like clever, but I noticed a lot of people on Goodreads trashing the beginning, saying it was the worst part. But I liked it.
All right.
It is the story of Pride and Prejudice told through like a neighborhood, through neighborhood gossip.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, well, did you know that Elizabeth was seen talking to Mr. Darcy, and she says she hates him, but we all know she had like intentions on him. And it's kind of fun because you see what it would look like from the outside.
Sure. But
also like they get a lot of stuff wrong. So people who've actually read the story know like what the real story is. And it's kind of clever. And it's not focused solely on Elizabeth and Darcy. Like it focuses a lot on Jane and Bingley, and it focuses a lot on Wickham and Lydia. And it's kind of a fun like way to sum things up. And then it doesn't just stop at the end of the events of Pride and Prejudice. It goes through like the next 6 years. So Elizabeth and Darcy eventually get married, and I think they have a double wedding with Bingley and Jane.
Right.
And then they Elizabeth and Darcy move to Pemberley. Elizabeth eventually has a couple kids. Jane has a couple kids. They get together they get together a lot.
Mhm.
They have a big ball every year at Pemberley, which is like basically all of the cast from the original book reunites at this ball.
Right.
And as well as like a ton of people from the local town and stuff.
Right.
And it's supposed to be in memory of Darcy's mother. There's also like the Bingleys are friends with a young lawyer named Alveston who has a crush on Georgiana, so he always comes with them to the Pemberley estate, and then Elizabeth's like trying to set them up, but then at the same time, do you remember the Colonel from the first book?
Yeah, Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Yep.
He is back, and he's been named like the Earl or he got some title of nobility,
Okay.
and so he's like a big deal now. And I guess he was also like thinking of proposing to Georgiana, even though there's a massive age difference.
And he's her cousin.
Yeah, but it was back then.
It's
so
true.
it
That was true. Yeah.
okay-ish.
It's,
So there's like kind of like a weird little love triangle thing going on at the beginning.
Okay.
The book starts with Elizabeth. She's planning for Lady Anne's ball. There's some stuff going on like with the servants. You can see the servants' point of view a little bit.
Mhm.
There's some talk about some ghost story going on in the woods. This book also spends a lot, like
considerable
amounts of time going through Darcy's family history. And
Okay.
like he had a weird grandpa who didn't like to live in the mansion. He liked to live out in the woods.
Okay.
And that comes into, that is very important later in the story. Wink. And there's just like a lot of kind of weird side stuff. And the ball is really set up as this huge thing. And I was looking forward to the ball a lot.
Mhm.
Jane shows up at the mansion and they're like, oh, it's time to get ready for the ball. And then, but there's also this like love triangle stuff going on with Georgiana, and Elizabeth's like trying to navigate it and help. Basically, she's trying to make it so that Georgiana doesn't feel pressured to make a decision like one way or the other, so that
Mhm.
it's Georgiana's choice and not like the men kind of forcing her.
Right.
But then all that kind of just gets ignored for a while when Lydia shows up at the mansion screaming that Darcy's been shot in the woods.
Darcy's been shot?
No, sorry. Wickham has been shot in the woods.
Okay.
She screams that to Darcy.
Okay.
So Darcy, Colonel Fitzwilliam, and I think Alveston, who's the lawyer,
Yep.
the three of them go out. It might not be Alveston. It might be a different third character. I'm not sure. But anyway, three guys go out into the woods to find where Darcy was. Or not Darcy, Wickham was. I'm going to mix up those two a lot.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a headache and I took a bunch of Tylenol. So if my brain gets loopy, it's because I'm rolling on drugs, man.
That Advil.
Yeah. Oh, it's wild. So anyways, they go out to the woods to find where the supposed murder of Wickham happened. But instead of finding that, they find Wickham on the ground with this guy who he was traveling with, his friend. He's an army guy, and I can't remember his name at all. Anyway, army guy is dead, and Wickham's like beside his corpse covered in blood. And then Wickham says something like, I killed him, it was all my fault, I killed him, or something like that.
Right.
So
Case
what
closed, boys.
yeah. Well, yeah. So they drag Wickham back to the mansion, and they also, I think they take the body back too.
Okay.
There's like some talk of like forensics and like 1800s forensics and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I don't think they like, I think they decided it was more important to get the body to a safe location where it couldn't be like mangled by animals and stuff.
Right.
Rather than like preserving a crime scene.
Right.
So they get the body back to the mansion. There's all this talk about how Darcy's like a magistrate, but he can't preside over this case because it's his family and his mansion. So there'd be like conflict of interest.
Right.
So then he has to go and find this other guy who he doesn't like and get this guy to come back and help him with the case. And it's the middle of the night. So the guy's like, oh, why'd you wake me up? And it's a really weird and boring back and forth, and, like immediately following a murder.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of a weird pacing thing.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Wickham has been sedated,
Okay.
and Lydia too has been sedated because she was like hysterical.
Right.
They get the guy back. He looks at the body. I think there was like blunt force trauma on the front of the head and on the back of the head. Oh yeah, there's a small wound on the front of the head, and then the killing blow was on the back of the head, but it was all like blunt force.
Right.
But there was a gunshot that was heard in the woods too. So then they kind of assume, and they haven't talked to Wickham yet. This is just what their assumption is that this guy tried to shoot Wickham, and then Wickham beat him to death with a stone.
Okay.
But then they can't find a stone anywhere, so it's kind of like, oh no, what are we gonna do? But Wickham had said, "Oh, I killed him," so they're just like, "Well, he confessed."
Yeah.
Then what happened is, suddenly Darcy is like on Wickham's side, and he's got all these conflicting emotions because he hates Wickham from before,
Right.
and they haven't really even spoken since the events of the first book. But he's like on Wickham's side, and he's like, "Oh well, Wickham didn't mean I actually killed him. Wickham meant it's my fault this guy's dead." And so they're going into that. There's this weird little section where it goes back to Elizabeth's perspective, and she goes out to the woods to talk to the family of servants who serve at the manor.
Right.
And the family has one son who's like, I believe he's like 16-ish, and he's really sick and he's dying. And so they're trying to like make things comfortable for him, and Elizabeth doesn't want to like make him uncomfortable by being there. But she wants to like talk to them because this guy died like pretty much right outside of their like cabin in the woods.
Right.
And then this whole part feels kind of out of place because like up until this point you're mostly from Darcy's perspective. It's mostly about like family history and how like murder cases would work back then, and like what's going on with him and Wickham, and what's going on with like him and the Colonel and all this stuff. And then it's just like all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're back to Elizabeth. She's in the woods talking to some random people. Her and Georgiana go for a walk. Elviston's there and just kind of like stands off to the side. And then we just leave those characters pretty much for the rest of the book.
All right.
It just goes, then it goes straight to Darcy. They have like it's kind of an autopsy, I think. And then I can't remember the word for it, but it's like an inquest or something where it's like not the actual trial, but it's like a meeting with some of the witnesses before the trial.
Right.
And it was basically for them to just be like, okay, yeah, we're going to go through and press charges on Wickham, saying that he's the killer.
Okay.
The only witnesses were this, I think he was like a barkeep who witnessed Wickham and this guy like arguing in the bar before they left.
Okay.
They also say that Wickham's testimony of the night is you can't trust it because he was drunk, I guess.
Okay.
And they make a big deal about how drunk Wickham was, but then for a while they're like, oh, he was too drunk, he doesn't know what he was doing. And then it was, well, he wasn't that drunk, but he was like drunk enough that you could tell. So it's kind of weird. It goes back and forth a lot. Then they go in for the actual trial. Darcy and the Colonel both give like good accounts of Wickham, and they're basically saying like, we don't think Wickham actually killed him. We think Wickham just feels bad, like that it's his fault that his friend died. And it turns out, so the story that comes out is that this army guy and Wickham started arguing in the carriage about something. The army guy stopped the carriage and ran off into the woods. Wickham chased after him, and then he doesn't remember anything, or I think that's what it was.
Okay.
It's kind of weird. Like Wickham doesn't give a good account. And and then was there a Mrs. Young or something in the first book? Who was like Wickham's like other lover or something?
Oh, she was Georgiana's governess. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I didn't remember the character from Pride and Prejudice, but she makes a big appearance in this book.
Okay.
And it's given so much attention that I was like, okay, this has to be like a character from Pride and Prejudice, because otherwise, why is she even here?
Yeah. Yeah, she was Georgiana's governess, and she facilitated. I completely blanked on his name.
Wickham?
She helped Wickham almost run off with Georgiana, and then she gave Wickham a place to stay when he and Lydia were staying in London.
Okay, apparently, yeah, so this lady comes in again. She's important again in this book.
Okay.
But all she does is she shows up to the trial at Wickham and just stares at him the whole time. And then we're going to get into spoilers because I can't talk about this book without saying, like, it's a murder mystery. You have to talk about the ending.
There's going to be spoilers.
I'll say before we give spoilers, like, if you really want to read the book, shut it off and go read it now.
We'll wait for you. Sorry.
But also, like, I wouldn't really recommend that. I didn't love this book.
Okay.
I'll say that up front. I'd say there are a lot better things you could read.
Okay.
Better murder mysteries, better Pride and Prejudice stuff.
Okay.
But anyways, now we're into spoilers. So Wickham gets found guilty at the trial because he just said, I murdered him, I killed him, whatever he said.
Right.
And then immediately upon finding that Wickham was guilty, Mrs. Young stands up, runs outside, and jumps under a wagon. Like,
what?
She suicides herself by jumping directly under a wagon.
Okay. All right.
Darcy watches this and is like, oh no, I am shocked. Darcy's point of view in this is very, like, disconnected and very, like, it's very cold.
Okay.
And it's very different from the original Pride and Prejudice where, like, Elizabeth is, like, full of life and, like, witty. Right. This Darcy is not witty. He's not, like, he doesn't have the same, like, kind of cleverness or same, like, sort of mischievousness that Elizabeth has.
Right.
He's very, like, cold by the facts, very, like, oh no, someone just killed themselves in front of me. How dreadful.
Okay.
So he watches that happen, and then he goes back to the courtroom, and a priest and a doctor come in and say, oh, hey, do you remember that boy who was sick in the woods before? Well, actually, he was the murderer.
What?
He came out of his cabin. So his sister, who was like a 20-year-old servant at the mansion,
right,
she got pregnant.
Okay.
And from an army man.
Okay.
And he sees an army man wandering in the woods, think it's the guy who knocked up her sister.
Just kills him?
So he hits him in the head with a poker thing, a fire poker.
Okay.
And then that knocks the colonel down. And when the colonel falls down, he lands on the tombstone of the grandpa who was buried in the woods.
Okay.
Remember the grandpa from the beginning of the book who lived in the woods?
Right.
Well, he apparently got buried out there, and that was his tombstone. And the guy landed on it and cracked his skull.
And nobody noticed that when they went out to the crime scene,
or? No. I don't know what happened to that tombstone because they're arguing about the stone forever, and they find a smooth stone under some branches, like further away from the crime scene, and they think maybe it's it, but it doesn't have any blood on it.
Okay.
And they don't really think to be like, well, I don't know.
Okay.
Like, it's just so weird how that conclusion comes up. And it turns out, so the big twist is it turns out that Wickham had gotten this girl pregnant behind Lydia's back.
Okay.
And he was the army guy.
Okay.
And the whole thing that they were doing in the woods is they were riding their carriage towards Pemberley to drop off Lydia to hang out for the ball. And then they were going to go back, and him and this army guy were going to go, and then they were going to grab the mother and the baby, and they were going to take them to Mrs. Young, who was going to raise the baby.
Okay.
So Mrs. Young killed herself when she thought that Darcy was going to be hanged for this crime. I don't know what happened to the baby. Also, there's tales of a ghost wandering through the woods, and it's like this scary woman wandering through the woods, and I think it was Mrs. Young going to check on the baby.
Okay.
Which it has no like bearing to the plot, and I don't really know why they make a big point of talking about this ghost story at the very beginning.
Right.
Because it immediately gets forgotten during the crime scene.
Right.
It's kind of like decided at the end of the book that Wickham's a creep, but he's not a murderer, so he's okay.
Guilty for being a creep.
And then, like, I think at the end, Georgiana ends up with Alveston. And I think it just kind of ends there. I don't remember. The very ending of this book is very sloppy.
Okay.
So that's plot. Let's get into, like,
all right,
critiques and talking about it.
Okay.
So I kind of mentioned the problem before with, like, Darcy's perspective and how he's kind of just cold and sort of bland.
Not the fun Mr. Darcy of the last book.
Yeah, and I feel like this book has a major, I don't know if to say it's a perspective problem or a tone problem, but it's like you have all the original characters of Pride and Prejudice, but you don't have any of the fun, like, the
Humor?
fun of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like you don't have, like, there aren't really a lot of, like, fun back and forths with Elizabeth and Darcy. They're just, like, they're in love. They have very few scenes together, surprisingly.
Weird.
Yeah, because you'd think, like, if you're making
Yeah.
a fan thing of Pride and Prejudice, that would be the two you'd focus on.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be a lot more Elizabeth Darcy going on,
But it's very little, and it's stuff like Elizabeth, the night that Darcy goes out to find that other magistrate guy, Elizabeth waits up for Darcy, and then when he gets home, they talk for like 2 seconds before like they both fall asleep, and it's kind of like, or see, I don't even remember if they both fell asleep. I think Elizabeth might have fallen asleep or something, but like, it's a hard book because it's like there's not a lot that goes on in the book.
right.
And so a lot of the little details just kind of like, they seem unimportant and then they're easy to forget.
Right.
As a murder mystery, I don't really like it either. Because most murder mysteries, like, you have like, here's a bunch of characters who you might suspect.
Right.
And then like, here's a bunch of clues and can you put them together? And, you know, you're kind of like trying to figure it out as the detective in the book is figuring it out.
Right.
And, you know, you're like, well, is it this person? Is it this person? Is it this person? This book is just like, straight off the beginning, it's like, Wickham is the killer. And Darcy doesn't really like investigate it. You know, you kind of think like, oh, he'd be like the Sherlock of this book or something.
Yeah.
But he's not. He just like, he almost sits back and the book is like more concerned with explaining how murder investigations went back then,
Right.
rather than like trying to set up an interesting murder mystery.
So, would you try a different book from the same author? Or do you think you're just, this is done, you wouldn't try another one?
Based on what I read, okay, so I was reading on Goodreads, and I was reading a lot of the other reviews, because I noticed an interesting trend. Like, half the reviews were very positive. They were like, oh, this is Pride and Prejudice, yay.
Right.
And then the other half of the reviews were like, this is so bad. This is like, this is P.D. James' worst book, and
Right.
it's also like the worst Pride and Prejudice take I've ever read.
Right.
And so then I got kind of curious because I noticed a few of them did mention like that this was not, like, compared to P.D. James' other stuff, this wasn't good.
Right. Because she is like a renowned mystery author. Like, she's a big name. I'm pretty sure it's she.
Yeah, it's a she.
Okay.
I think the P might stand for Patricia,
Okay.
but I do not know that. I'm just guessing.
You're just taking a complete shot in the dark here.
It does start with a P.
Yes.
No, I would maybe try a different one of her books, but like not based on this one.
Right.
But it would be more like if I heard good things about her other books, I'd maybe give it a second shot. But I definitely didn't love this book. I didn't hate it as much as some people seem to online, but I mean, I would put it like a 2 out of 5.
Her name is Phyllis Dorothy James,
So
the
close.
Baroness James of Holland Park. She's a baroness.
Ooh.
Yeah. She's passed now, but she was like a really big name for mystery, so I figured that this would have been like a really good adaptation, but
Yeah, same here. And you know what? It's kind of, I was so disappointed because it started with a lot of promise.
right.
And it, like, they kept hyping up this ball, and I figured, like, okay, the ball's going to be a big event. There's going to be all the characters from the old book there. You're going to have, like, Mr. Collins doing something silly. You're going to have the dad there saying something funny.
Yeah.
You're going to have the mom there acting ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, Jane and Elizabeth, they're going to get a chance to reunite, but Darcy and Elizabeth are going to have their own little, like, scene. And then, like, a murder's going to happen at the ball.
At the ball would have been good, yeah.
And all of these people are going to be suspects.
Yeah. Yeah, like your traditional, like, Clue style
Yeah.
mystery. That would be pretty good, yeah.
Exactly. I was looking for something a little more like Murder on the Orient Express rather than what we got here. But yeah, so then they're setting up the ball, and it's like they're putting so much hype into the ball, and then they cancel the ball.
Oh.
Yeah. So Lydia shows up the day before the ball screaming about the murder, And then it's like, okay, well, we better cancel the ball. And it's almost from that point on, it's just like the fun is just sucked out of the book. It's like, okay.
All right.
Do you have any questions about the book?
Were there any things that you really like enjoyed about this book, or was it all kind of bleh?
I think the stuff with like the Georgiana angle could have been good.
Oh, with the lawyer.
With the lawyer and with the
Fitzwilliam.
colonel.
Yep.
Because I think Georgiana's kind of an interesting character. Like she's a little bit more like Jane, I'd say, than Elizabeth.
Okay.
And because she's like sweet and she's really pretty.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like innocent and naive.
Right.
Whereas Jane's like, whereas Elizabeth's more like kind of clever and like kind of, like I wouldn't use the word naive to ever talk about Elizabeth.
Right.
So I thought that could have been fun as like Elizabeth's like coaching Georgiana, or like Elizabeth's kind of like helping her in some way, or
yeah,
but also like trying not to interfere. Like I thought that could have been a lot of fun, and those scenes were pretty good.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? If this whole book had just been from Elizabeth's perspective, and like with Elizabeth's like, you know, she's a woman, she's not allowed to take part in these investigations, but she's smart and she's like, and not ambitious, but she's like, you know, she's not the type to just sit by and let things happen.
Yeah.
Like would get involved in some way, and
right.
I thought that would be a very interesting way to do a detective story.
Yeah.
But unfortunately,
that didn't happen.
We just had to read about how Darcy was kind of like unemotional and didn't care about the situation.
Well, that's kind of unfortunate. I have higher hopes for this then.
Yeah, and you know what though? But like if you do look at the Goodreads scores, like it is very polarized. Like
yeah,
most people, or not most people, about half the people are saying like it's a 5 out of 5, but then the other half are saying it's like 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
And
it kind of, I guess, depends on what you want out of it. If you just want Elizabeth and Darcy no matter what, then yeah, bring it on. But I guess somebody who's more critical of it really sees those flaws shining through.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is, because I could see like, if you're a hardcore Pride and Prejudice fan, I could see you like liking it no matter what, just because it has the characters.
Yeah.
But also, if you're a hardcore fan, I could see you reading it and being like, well, how come Elizabeth and Darcy aren't spending more time together? Or
That's
how
true.
come, like, you're kind of getting blue-balled in a literary sense, because you're like, I want to see this happen, or I want to see this.
Yeah.
And this book doesn't deliver on those things that you would really want.
Right.
Yeah, overall, I don't know if I'd recommend it.
Okay.
If you're really, really into Pride and Prejudice, I mean, you could read it and you might be one of those people who really enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Just because I thought the pacing was a little off. Like there's large chunks of the book where it's just like, hey, we're going to talk about how murder investigations would work back then.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of interesting, but it has nothing to do with the characters. And it's like, it's not what you'd expect in a Pride and Prejudice type story.
Right. Especially like a post-marriage Pride and Prejudice story. That seems like there's a lot of smutty Pride and Prejudice post-marriage stories out there.
Well, I wasn't expecting smut per se, but it was just
but you'd expect some kind of interaction. Like, I don't know. That seems to be like what a lot of people want out of Pride and Prejudice sequels. You want interaction between Elizabeth and Darcy now that they're together and married. It doesn't have to be smutty. It's just you want them to be a married couple. You want to see them, you know, being happy together.
Yeah. Or even if it's them fighting and reconciling.
Yeah.
Like, you just want to see that interaction between those two characters that you love, because the first book is all about their interactions.
Yeah. Well, that's what you're there for. If you're picking up a Pride and Prejudice book, chances are you're picking it up because you want to see Elizabeth and Darcy.
Yeah.
So
it feels weird. I mean, Wickham is a character that anyone who read the original book probably doesn't like Wickham.
Right.
I mean, he's not set up as a likable character. So I don't know why he's such a focus on this one.
Right.
And then it's like, I actually thought, because, you know, Lydia says, oh, they've killed him, or they killed Wickham or whatever. I thought Wickham was going to be the murder victim.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's kind of genius because nobody likes Wickham. So it's like, and everyone in Pemberley would have reason to kind of hate Wickham.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, that's fun. Like, yeah, kill off the character that nobody likes.
Yeah.
But then it's like, no, the character nobody likes apparently killed his own friend. And you're like, oh, okay.
Should have had the big ball. Wickham turns up dead at the big ball, and then everybody's a suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been perfect. Or have Wickham turn up dead at the big ball. Have Darcy be the main suspect because him and Wickham never got along.
Yeah.
Have Elizabeth be the one who's like trying to figure out because
she's
she
trying
knows
to
Darcy wouldn't
absolve
kill
her
him.
husband of the accusations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have
that'd be
Georgiana in there too. Like, oh, maybe Georgiana could have been the killer.
Oh. Yeah, you should write this.
We're writing this book right now. All right. No, we're over time, so we're going to end the episode here.
Okay.
Just want to say Merry Christmas and Happy Thanksgiving to you all.
No, you're too early.
I want to thank everyone for 1 million downloads.
No, we're still too early for that one, too.
All right. I want to big shout out for everyone who subscribed to the Patreon and has given us $50,000 this past month.
That's not right either, no.
Okay, I want to... How many listens do we have right now? Like 80?
We're at about 80... 85 or so.
Amazing. Thank you, guys.
We're getting there.
Really hoping to hit the big 100 sometime this month.
That'd be... I mean, we're on track.
Yeah.
A couple more episodes we should, yeah.
Anyway, thank you for listening. You can find us on...
iTunes, Spotify, Podbean at LiteraryAF. I'm on Twitter at LiteraryAFPod. We've got our Gmail, LiteraryAFPod@gmail.com.
YouTube, I think.
Yeah, we're on YouTube, LiteraryAF as well.
And
I think that's it.
Hit me up on Instagram. I am single, ladies. And yeah, that's everything. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day, evening,
week.
Time.
This goes up on Sundays, so have a good week.
Peace out.
Bye.